Hi there. What we're going to look at today is probably my favorite feature ring to put into turnings. It's called the Indian blanket design. Now, I didn't invent this. The first one I know of who did it was Ray Allen. If you have his book, I'm sure you've seen it in his gallery, and they're just beautiful. In fact, I recommend you take a look at his book if you haven't already done so. It's by Dale Nish, and it's about Ray Allen's work. Now, this one was a little interesting because I had a major catch. I was putting it into a vessel like this one, and while cleaning the inside, a major catch occurred and everything blew apart. The only thing that survived almost intact was the feature ring. 3 or 4 cracks. I was going to throw it away. My wife said, no, I love it, it's beautiful. So I managed to repair the cracks to the point I can't even find them now. I put a segmented bottom in it, and she loves it. It's a candy dish. Now, this looks really intricate, really complex. It's not as tough as it looks to bake it. One thing you do need is perfect accuracy. If these points don't line up exactly, it throws the whole thing off and you can see it from a mile away. So we'll take a look at how to do this today. Stick around.
I have some leftover walnut pieces from when I did the seat for the 3-legged stool. I will rip those, another blank of walnut, and some birch, and I will mill those pieces to 2 inches by 1.5 inches. I am cutting the segments with the miter saw angle set to 30 degrees. You may choose to do it at 20 degrees or 40 degrees or whatever you like. I've used 30 degrees on all of them, and I just like the looks of it so far. The walnut segments are being cut much like a triangle with a blunt top. The birch segments will be cut the same but much longer. I am going to cut 20 walnut and 20 birch segments. This will give me enough for 10 of the Indian blanket designs. I need 8 for my feature ring, and that will give me 2 extras in case 1 or 2 of them don't work out perfectly. I also need 40 slices of birch and 40 of walnut at 1/4 inch thick. With the miter saw set back to 90 degrees, I'm cutting 4 of the birch segments in half.
For the glue up, I've made a gluing platform. It's just 2 pieces of MDF. The bottom one's about 2 3/4 inches wide. The top one's 1 inch. Nice and straight, and I'm going to cover this with wax paper, and then I can do my glue up on here.
When adding pieces to the gluing platform, the first end is clamped down very tightly. Each piece is put in, there's a slight gap between the platform and the front of that walnut piece. Then the birch piece at the end of that is clamped down snugly. The second clamp provides resistance so that when the center walnut wedge is pressed into place, it causes everything to be very tight. With the dry fit confirming that everything fits nicely, here's a quick look at the glue up of the first section. As you might imagine, it's a real good idea to pay close attention to getting the colors in the right order.
With the glue dry, I'm just scraping off the excess glue. Fortunately, I have a drum sander. So when I've got all the excess glue off, I'm going to feed them through the drum sander, get them all dimensioned the same. If I didn't, I'd put them through the planer, and taking extremely fine bites, I might be able to do a decent job. But obviously the drum sander will do a better job. Now you may wonder why I've made these so thick. Well, I have two reasons. The first one is that the ones I've done in the past were 3/4 of an inch to maybe an inch thick. And this is end grain to end grain gluing. And you may know that is not a very effective way to glue things. They don't hold very well. So the 3/4 inch things that I did came apart very easily. They were very fragile. I'm just hoping the extra thickness will give a better glue service, and we'll see what happens with that. The second reason is it's going to be a very tall segment. And the thicker it is, the better chance I have of putting a contour on there. If it was thin, I have to go with a very straight segment, a very straight ring, and I don't want that. I don't like that look on a bowl. So I'm going to finish sanding these, and then we'll carry on with the next bit. Well, the sanding is complete, and we've already got some patterns here you can use if you want to. You can use it like this. You can use it like this. You can stack them this way. You can stack them that way. Get some use out of them that way if you prefer, but that's not what we're looking for today. So let's carry on to the next step and start to make that Indian blanket design appear.
I am cutting each of the boards into 4 strips. The boards are 1 7/8 of an inch wide. The 3 1/8 inch kerfs take up 3/8 of an inch, leaving 1 1/2 inches. Divide that by 4, and each of the strips should be 3/8 of an inch thick. I am using a Rockler thin rip table saw jig to make sure that each of the strips is the same thickness. I'm actually cutting them just a hair under 3/8 of an inch, which will leave the last strip a few 64ths of an inch thicker. I will make that one even with the others by using the drum sander.
Here I have 2 of the pattern boards that are not cut yet, and 2 that have been sliced. When you take these slices and flip each one, you can see how the pattern starts to emerge. When you take the second one and flip each one and then flip the whole thing, now you get the picture of how the Indian blanket design shows up. Now, if you remember what I said about these being very fragile, I wasn't kidding. Even making them a little wider doesn't necessarily prevent this from happening. I just bumped this very gently, in fact, against this top, and it fell apart. Now I've tried to put lots of glue on there, and apparently it wasn't enough, so now I've got to try to repair this. It's not making me smile. I've made another gluing platform, and I've covered it with this packing tape just to protect the MDF from the glue so I can reuse it. I've made a board that's going to sit on the end. It's 90 degrees here to make sure I can line up the boards properly. I'll just clamp that down. Now I've made a piece of walnut 3/4 of an inch thick that's going to be the border. I didn't want it thinner because I don't want it to be flexible. I want it to be nice and straight and strong. Next I will glue the boards, and I have to make sure that I keep them nice and snug here to make sure that they line up. I don't want anything like this to happen, so something's out of place. So I'll constantly check while I'm gluing to make sure they're always against here as I clamp them in place. Something I think I forgot to mention while I was cutting the end pieces of the birch in half. Although I cut them as close as possible to in half, it's not likely they're going to be exactly in half. So I marked one end to make sure that I always put that at the same end, so I don't accidentally put one like this instead and have it not line up as well as it would if it's done this way. Not much of a difference likely, but any difference at all is too much.
This is a quick look at the first glue up. At this point, I noticed that one of the boards had moved just slightly, but just slightly is too much.
This board is the one that fell apart. I managed to sand it and glue it back together, but in sanding it, I took off 1/8 of an inch in total. Now that doesn't seem like a big deal, and at this end, it's no big deal at all. But the further along you move, the more this is out. I'm not sure if you can see this, but this is almost tight on this angle, and there's quite a gap. It really shows up when you put what will be the next one to it. You can see that each one, as you move along, is further and further out. And this one's pretty bad. The only thing I can think to do is to glue up these first 4 pieces, and when I glue these on, I'm going to have to cut as close as I can to the center of each of these birch pieces, and then slide them over and put them on as close as I can. So that's what I'm going to try to do now. Let's cut these. I don't know how well this is going to show up on camera. Pencil marks on walnut are not that obvious to begin with. But what I've done is I've put the first one snug up against this pointed board and held it in place. Then I made a mark on the exact center of this walnut piece and across here, and I've lined those up. I've done the same on the other 3, and I believe that's going to accomplish what I want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to glue up the walnut piece here and these 3 boards, and then I will glue these pieces on after.
This is a real quick look at gluing those pieces in place. Dried glue really gums up sandpaper badly, so before sending the boards through the drum sander, I'm scraping off the excess glue.
All 4 boards are sanded now, and I've marked the exact center between these points. Now I'm going to line up the vertical lines I've dropped from there on the kerf of my miter saw's auxiliary table and make those cuts. When gluing these together, it's very important to make sure that all of the little points line up. And I'll carry on and do the next 9.
I am making sure that one side of each of these pattern boards is dead flat. Now it's time to make sure that all the pieces are the same height.
I put double-sided tape on here, and I'm going to use that to hold these down while I send them through the drum sander. With the blocks all sanded, I've put a horizontal line across one side of each block to make sure I keep it oriented the same way. I've also put a horizontal line and an X, so I make sure I use the same face each time. Now what I want to do is draw a line on the tips of these feathers on both ends. And I will use those to orientate it when I put it on the miter saw. Luckily, I made a couple of extras. You might be able to see right here, this one did not end up perfect. I've used some scrap plywood cut to the same size as the segments to do a test. The joints turned out very nicely. I'm using 3 hose clamps because of the height. Now I will do the same with the segments.
I'm making a mark on a piece of masking tape I've put on the auxiliary table for my miter saw that corresponds to the vertical line I put on the segment. Now I'm drawing a line to make sure that each of the segments is positioned the same. Because of the height of the segments, I had to tape the blade guard for the miter saw up out of the way. I'm keeping my fingers well out of the way, but it sure is a different feeling not having that guard there. To be sure that all the segments were exactly the same length, I used a stop block, and I had to make 2 cuts on the first one, sneaking up on it to make sure I had it at the right length. Now it's time for the glue up. I'm putting a 1/4 inch thick piece of walnut between each of the segments, and I have cut it to make sure that the grain is going in the same direction as the segments. Believe it or not, when I did this as a dry fit, it worked perfectly. But now, of course, with the glue on it, the tape breaks.
Well, there you go. That's how you make the blanket design. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this just yet, but I'm sure I can incorporate it into something. I'm sorry this video took so long. I really like to keep them to about 20 minutes or less. But this one was a little longer. There's a lot to show. The main thing here is just accuracy. Make sure that everything is milled exactly the way you want it to start with. Makes a big difference in the end. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day in your shop and be safe. Bye now.